question is, who is the most underrated player in the NBA? So my thought is it's definitely not a very popular take because he's been underrated his entire short career, and little bias involved in this answer. As you guys will come to learn, I am a passionate Suns fan, but it will not bias my answers. But that being said, I think the most underrated player in the league is DeAndre Ayton. DeAndre Ayton was the number one pick in the draft for a reason. He is a center, a 7-foot-plus center who has the agility of a guard. He can move on his feet faster than most centers in the league. He's rough around the edges. I will be the first to admit it. He's 2 years into the league. 1.5 years because his short game suspension. But he is so agile. He's so mobile. There was so much upside. I mean, it's tough because he's been compared to Luka. He's been compared to Trae Young because they were below him in the draft. But I think that's an unfair comparison. I think it's a development process. Obviously, Luka Doncic, obviously Trae Young are generational players. I think Ayton has that same upside. Rookie year, he was a 16-10 game, 17-10 a game kind of guy. Last year, he was a 19-12 rebound, 19 points, 12 rebound player. That is crazy. I guess technically this year because it's still going on. Only person, if he finishes with those statistics with 18 plus and like 11 plus or 12 plus, the only person who's had those same statistics in his first or second year, Shaquille O'Neal. And I understand the game's changing. It's a guards game now. But I think we undervalue the importance of a good big man. And he gets knocked. He gets knocked for, people gave him a hard time for his defense. But his defense improved exponentially this year. And the tough part is in college in particular, he was guarding ones. He was guarding point guards. He was guarding shooting guards as a 5. And so obviously he's not going to have the same measurable statistics as someone else who's guarding the 5. But this year he took leaps. He almost averaged 2 blocks a game. And I see him being a 25-point, 12 rebound type guy, like 25-12 guy in the future. I think we'll put him as one of the best centers in the league. And he shot threes in college. He shot threes decently well. He was a sub-3, but he can still do it. But he hasn't been given the opportunity in the league. So once he develops that 3-point shot, I think I cannot see him not taking the league by storm. The man, without shooting threes, managed to score 25 points in a single quarter. And so once he develops that part of his game, I think without question, he will be an all-star. I think he'll be a perennial all-star, generational talent. And not to mention he's single-handedly, with the help of Kelly Oubre, developed a brand new culture in the Suns surrounding the Valley Boys trend. He's a very fun guy. And I think he has the potential to be the franchise player alongside Booker. So I'm very excited to see how that plays out. And I definitely think he's been undervalued.
Yeah, I certainly see that. I think we talk a lot about Ayton, and I do think he doesn't get necessarily all the props that he does deserve. I've been watching Ayton ever since he played AAU out here in California, and he is a man-child. And I think with him, I'm just hoping he stays healthy and he can kind of be the answer of, what would Joel Embiid if health was not a risk or anything like that. But in my kind of overall consensus, trying to decide who I thought was the most underrated, yes, DeAndre Ayton came to mind, but after really thinking about it, there's a couple reasons that I didn't put him on there. And one of the reasons was because no one's saying he's bad. No one's saying he's not a good player. If you ask anyone in the league, they're like, what are your thoughts on DeAndre Ayton, or just the general public? No one's going to say, oh, he's a bad player or anything like that. So most people would say, yeah, he's a good player. Maybe they may undervalue him a little bit, but no one's saying he's bad. Everyone thinks he's a solid player. Plus, only being 2 years in the league, that still isn't quite enough time to really figure out who you are as a player. It's hard to judge someone when they've been in for 2 years, and especially with the suspension, it did take a good amount of games left. So I think we want to see a little more of Ayton. And part of the reason is also the team that he's on. I mean, there's 15 teams in the Western Conference, and right now the Suns were around 13th at the end of kind of conclusion of play pre-COVID. So no one is really necessarily watching the Suns, and they don't really have the opportunity to rate Ayton for that circumstance. And also, it's really hard to be the top player in your team when you have Devin Booker on the team. And he is the one that, for so long, has been called the most underrated player. And I think he finally got his props this year, get with the All-Star bid that he should have gotten outright. But I think when you have Devin Booker kind of overshadowing you on that team, I kind of get why Ayton hasn't quite developed into ultimately what we would think. And so that ultimately brings it to mind. And, you know, what did I think? And I thought long and hard about this one, and different players really came to mind. But to really start it, I had to think, how do you measure value? You know, if we're looking for the most undervalued player, okay, it's the player who doesn't get the credit for the value that they bring their team. And this may sound really weird at first, but my overall argument is that the most underrated player, at least this year, this isn't in totality, this is just this year, is actually Chris Paul. And that one seems really weird, and it seems like, what on earth, how? But when you really break it down, it starts to make sense, because Chris Paul is, I feel like, objectively a good player. I'll go into a little bit more about that. But people see him as a bad player, which is different from Ayton. Because a lot of people see Chris Paul being washed up, haven't paid attention to him really since he was necessarily on the Clippers, and he was seen as the problem in Houston. I remember when they had their whole playoff series, and that's after that series to the Warriors is when everyone started talking about the feud between Harden and Chris Paul. The actuality of that existed or not is a little bit debatable, but ultimately Daryl Morey, the owner of the Rockets, wrapped his arms around Harden, and Chris Paul was seen as the scapegoat. He was then sent to the Thunder for Russell Westbrook. And when he was sent to the Thunder, everyone thought he wouldn't dribble the basketball there. They thought he'd be shipped out right away. ESPN for about a week or two was just talking about, you know, what are the best trade scenarios? And then people kind of forgot about Chris Paul. I mean, the Thunder last year, 2019 season, or 2018-2019, had 27 primetime games. This year, they had 3. And they were expected to be horrible. No one thought about them. At the conclusion of play, the Thunder were 5th in the West, which is ridiculous when you think about the team that they're surrounded by. No one expected anything about this. And statistically, if you look at Chris Paul's season, as far as career averages, he was up in rebounds per game, field goal percentage, and free throw percentage. And he was playing really, really well. And there's a lot of people talking about, you know, should he be on all defensive team this year? And I think all this just goes to show that he is very, very underrated. And on that team, yes, I know Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a good player, but if you think of the other people, as far as Roberson, Schroeder, and others, this is a really young team. So he's not only providing value on the court, but also the leadership role in the locker room, and I don't think Chris Paul gets nearly the credit that he deserves.
I think you made a lot of good points. I think I completely agree. I think he is slightly underrated on that team. It's hard to call future Hall of Fame point guard underrated when everyone recognizes his game. And I think he's done incredible things with OKC this year. I can't disagree that he's probably the main reason they're in the playoffs, or one of the main reasons. But I think his team is actually underrated surrounding him. I mean, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is an incredibly talented young point guard. I think arguably he had a better season than Chris Paul. I think he brings more to the team with the invigoration of youth and his overall skill. And not to mention, Dennis Schroeder is one of the top 6-man candidates. He is brought so much life to the bench. That 3-guard tandem is very talented. Steven Adams is an underrated center in the league. He brings a lot on the defensive end, but he's a very talented player on the offensive end. I'll give you the Andre Roberson one. I don't think has much value to the team.
Yeah.
Danilo Gallinari, we forget about Danilo Gallinari, but he is arguably one of the most talented offensive players in the league. I mean, he's a little lackluster on defense, but he has always been incredibly talented on the offensive end. And so I think people forget about the other pieces in that team that have fueled the success of that team. I think Chris Paul is one of the best point guards of all time, and I think he's playing like one of the best point guards of all time. But
Yeah.
I don't think people, although he may be a little washed up, he was no doubt all-star this year. They gave him that all-star bid.
Mhm.
Personally, I think part of that was nostalgia. I do.
Yeah.
People
Yeah, I certainly agree there too.
can't pass up seeing Chris Paul. Same way MJ got the starting lineup when it should have been Vince Carter in the All-Star game. It's nostalgia, but I will admit he's talented, but I don't think we can call him underrated. I think he still has too much respect among the fans, among the players, among the league owners. I think he's playing up to expectation. I don't think it's hard to. I think he may be undervalued as in terms of his role on that team, but I don't think he's underrated.
Yeah, I certainly think just him as a whole, I think a lot of people don't realize how much he does, you know, being in charge of the entire really just players union there and being an advocate for them. I think there's a lot that Chris Paul does that goes unnoticed. I mean, as I think back to the season, like the only time I heard about Chris Paul was the whole like jersey scandal when he told Jordan Bell to tuck in his jersey. And that's like the only time I heard anything talked about Chris Paul. So it'll certainly be interesting. Yeah, I understand the whole Ayton idea. I think so much of that is a lot of people are underestimating necessarily the ceiling of him. And I don't think a lot of people watch him. You know, I don't think there's much Ayton slander, but I think a lot of people don't quite understand, you know, how good he could be. And I don't think a lot of people see what could be brewing over in the Suns. And I think it'll be interesting.
The Suns too. I mean, you're right. They don't have a lot of people watching their games. But they've made huge leaps this year. Last year they were worst record or second worst record, one of the worst records in the league. This year, I mean, they're 6 games out of the 8 seed, which is astronomically better than before. So I think in the future, with the growing team chemistry, brand new coach for like the 4th time now, and Monty Williams has done incredible things in Phoenix. I think as this team grows, I think Ayton's respect will also. So I'm very excited to see how that dynamic works out. But yeah, it'll be interesting.
There's something exciting there, especially with Monty Williams, like deciding that job over the Laker job, because there were so many different options for that guy. One of the most probably talented coaches out there that doesn't get talked.
Very talented young coach in relation to a lot of other coaches. So I'm excited. Things are brewing in Phoenix, but yeah, major props to what OKC is doing. So I'm really excited to see how basketball plays out.
Oh man, yeah, I'm excited. I think just as far as seeing young teams like that, you know, I know Chris Paul's on the older side, but OKC is a young team coming up through there. They've also got a whole bunch of draft picks. I remember, think of that Paul George trade. Yeah. I mean, people don't realize the treasure trove that OKC is now sitting on, and I think they'll be able to make some moves. And I think as far as young teams, I think this should be something we talk about in the future, you know, best future teams that we see. You know, I think Phoenix is in that conversation, certainly OKC. You're going to have to bring up Pelicans and a whole bunch of different people. But I think as far as future value, I'm excited to see both of these teams go forth and see how Chris Paul ends the twilight of his career. And it'll be interesting to see. And I think that's something that a lot of people certainly undervalue. So.
Yeah, we're going to get some insight, too, in a few weeks. We're going to be able to watch these 2 teams play, hopefully, barring any –
yeah, knock on wood. Looking for everything here.
We'll see, Calvin. We'll see how this plays out, but
I'm super excited. I think that veteran leadership, because I think as I think of the bubble and what's going to happen in Orlando, I think it's going to be mainly controlled by how good are the veterans on your team. Because I think they're going to bring that proper mindset. You know, that's why when people are talking about which teams are going to do well, they're talking about the people that have veteran leaders. You know, the Celtics with Kemba Walker, of course, LeBron James being the locker room in the Lakers, even Kawhi being around the block. And I think that's what's really going to play a role. So I think Chris Paul is going to do a really good job there because it's going to, for a lot of the young players, I think it's going to be a little weird. It's going to be different, and it's going to feel like they're back at AAU. And I think that's going to be something that is somewhat interesting, but I'm excited for this change. And I'm hoping eventually the NBA makes some more permanent changes. I like this tournament style. It kind of gets me vibes of March Madness, which of course we missed this year. And I think that style of play where every game is worth so much. And it's either that or I'm just desperate for any sports at this point, I think.
Probably a combination of the two. That's probably
yes.
But yeah, we'll just have to see.
No, I'm super excited.